Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We have no guest today. This is going to be our first episode in a long time without a guest. It is also our 101st episode. It is also our first episode covering the books of 1967. It is a major turning point here. It is a relaunch. How are you, Steve?
A little frantic right now. And I will also point out that it's our first episode in a while, period. Due to summer travel and stuff like that, we were not able to get an episode recorded before. Both of us were unavailable for various periods of time. So for any of you who've been jonesing for more content, I apologize. All two of you. So yeah. Just real quick, we're getting ready to send my daughter off to college. We leave tomorrow to take her up to New York City, where she will not be living in a water tower.
No. Oh, no.
Then, But then we also made plans a year and a half ago to go to the Paris Olympics as sort of a combination graduation gift for my daughter and 25th wedding anniversary trip for us. And we bought tickets to the women's soccer finals.
Having no idea that America would make it to the women's soccer finals, much less win the women's soccer final while you were watching.
Well, I mean, unless you make the assumption that we somehow rigged the whole thing to make sure that happened. Yes, indeed. Right. We had no idea that they would actually make it there. So, wonder of wonders, we were actually able to be there to cheer on our team to their gold medal victory, which was really just amazing. Fantastic. Yeah,
and Alexa started the USA chant in the audience.
She often did. There was one particular one, there was a corner kick at about 70 minutes in where she was very clearly the one who started it off. It was fantastic. I also stayed for much of the week in Barcelona with friend of the pod and friend of both of us, David Baldeón. His and his wife Alma's hospitality was overwhelming. Really, really appreciate everything that they did for us. And then spent a little bit of time visiting my mother-in-law in Maine. So that was about 2 weeks, and now I've got 36 hours here at home to get a bunch of things done, including recording this episode, and then we go back up to New York to drop my daughter off and become empty nesters.
Wow. I guess that's going to happen to all of us eventually, but here it is. It is happening to you this week.
Indeed. So a lot of stuff. And I do have to try to keep this relatively short today because I've got stuff I need to do in the next 24 hours here. But there's a number of things that have come up that I've been meaning to bring up next time that we had a Just You and Me episode that I didn't feel was appropriate to spend time on in an episode where we had a guest. So I just want to run through these relatively quickly here. One, we have been making a misstatement of late, actually throughout the entirety of our run on this show. And I know this because I actually went back and started re-listening to our podcast again during a period of time when I was really just thinking I need to retreat from the world and not pay any attention to anything going on in the world. And I'm going to go back to my happy place. Hey, you know what? There's this podcast that seems almost like it was made precisely for me. This is fantastic. But one thing we mentioned many times is that almost all of the villains in all the Spider-Man movies so far came from those first, 15 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, with the exception of Venom, who showed up in the third Sam Raimi movie. There are two other exceptions to that we had not acknowledged. Rhino apparently was in Amazing Spider-Man number 2.
Yes, played by Paul Giamatti, I believe.
Yes, but he was not invented in that first run of
That's
issues.
True.
Also, the Shocker actually showed up in the first MCU Spider-Man.
Well, yeah, he wasn't really. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure anybody ever actually called him the Shocker on screen, but
but he was wearing a brown quilted vest sort of thing that very clearly was supposed to be reminiscent of his of the supervillain's costume. And in the credits, they actually have two different characters credited as Shocker 1 and Shocker 2.
Yes.
Also, once again, a few other little things. I apologize to our listeners who may have had some issues with episodes showing up in your feed or showing up in your feed in the wrong order or whatnot. We were having some issues with SoundCloud, our hosting company. So if any of you had some kind of things where like the same episode downloaded multiple times, or hey, where's episode number 100? Wait a minute, it's here before episode 99 or anything like that. I apologize. That's not our doing, but we were finally able to get it fixed.
So if you're listening to this right right now and you realize, like, I don't remember episode 100, go back and check and see if you missed any episodes. They should all be posted now. And the good thing is episode 100 was an annuals episode, so it's okay to listen to out of order. So go back and find it now. We had a guest named Dan Santat on. It was a fantastic episode. Make sure you go back and listen to it if you missed it.
Yes. When we had Rob Salkowitz on, we were talking about whether Mary Jane might have been based on Stan Lee's daughter. And I went and did some research, and I found some research that I think is incorrect, because the article that was around the time that Stan Lee died was about how Mary Jane was really inspired and based on his wife. Mm-hmm. But A, the timeline doesn't work out for that, because his daughter was indeed about 16 when Mary Jane first was introduced. And B, his daughter had the same name as his wife, although she went by an initial nickname. She was Joan something, but so she was like JT or something like that. So yes, it sounds like indeed Rob Salkowitz may have been right. Mary Jane probably was largely based on Lee's daughter. Let's see. When I was at Heroes Con, I got a chance to speak, in addition to speaking with Steranko, I got to speak with Steve Englehart, who was there.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, I didn't speak long with him, but he's the one who introduced Patsy Walker into the Marvel Universe. He was friends with the late, great Steve Gerber. Steve Gerber was the one who had written a letter to, I forget, Spider-Man or Fantastic Four or something like that, saying, oh yeah, wouldn't it be awesome if you brought Patsy Walker into the Marvel Universe? I figured, that may have been communicated between these two friends, and then Steve Englehart did it. Steve Englehart said that, to his memory, this is the first time he remembers learning that that letter to the editor existed at all, and that he was not aware that Gerber had ever brought that idea up. Also, in our endless discussions in the early couple of years of the Marvel Universe, we talked about all of the abandoned castles in the greater New York City area. I found one of them. Mm-hmm. It's called Bannerman Castle, and it's on the Hudson River, about 45 minutes a little over an hour north of New York City. And it is a straight up castle on the Hudson, on a little sort of islandish thing. And if you take the Amtrak train or Metro North up north of New York City, up towards Poughkeepsie, you will see Bannerman Castle there in the river. And I went and looked up some more information about it. It was still intact and abandoned during those couple of years when we kept on seeing abandoned castles in the New York City area. So the fire that destroyed much of it had not yet happened, and it was not yet owned by the state or the Smithsonian, who are the two people who have owned it since. So there you go. That Bannerman Castle, that's where at least one of those supervillains had their New York area castle hideout.
All right. Should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, let's please do.
Okay. All right, everyone. Let's jump into the books of 1967. We will do the first half of January 1967 today, and then you'll go become an empty nester, and then you'll come back and we'll record part 2. Let's go into The Amazing Spider-Man number 44, Where Crawls the Lizard? So we first met Kurt Connors, a one-armed scientist who tried to cure his one-armedness and by taking lizard serum, because lizards can regrow limbs. And then he turned into an evil lizard man. And that was back in Spider-Man number 7, I believe. And then he has come back many times since, but just as good old Kurt Connors, one-armed scientist, who's helped out Peter Parker on several occasions. And each time there's been like, oh, but what if one day I become the lizard again? But it's never happened. Well, it finally happens. By sheer coincidence, Peter Parker is at the train station is this supposed to be Penn Station, I believe? I guess it doesn't say. But he's at a majestic train station, like, I guess, Penn Station, which was torn down right around this time. And he is seeing Aunt May off on a vacation. I always love their interactions. I love the way Stan writes their dialogue together. It just so happens that Kurt Connors is there, greeting his family, who... Now, one of the problems with the Lizard is that originally Spider-Man was on vacation in Florida when he encountered the Lizard. So it was a problem then making Kurt Connors a recurring character, because isn't he a Floridian? But he has basically been splitting his time between New York and Florida, and now it looks like his family is maybe moving up from Florida to join him. And he is worried that he is going to become the Lizard. And eventually does. He becomes Lizard and runs off into the tunnels, becomes evil again. I'm the strongest, most dangerous being on Earth. Before I'm through, I'll be the most feared of all. No one can stop me.
And they make it clear that the reason he's turning back into the Lizard has to do with his assistance to Spider-Man in defeating the Rhino in a recent issue. That something about the chemical that they came up with that dissolved the Rhino's exoskin, he used something that had something in common with the Lizard stuff, and that just by coming in contact with it, it has reactivated his lizardness.
So heroically sacrificed himself. So then, as we know, all lizards are inherently evil, so therefore if you become a lizard man, you become evil. Peter says goodbye to Aunt May. He notices Kurt Connor's family worried. He instantly pieces together what's going on. He turns to Spider-Man, goes and finds her. She's like, yep, I'm worried he's become the Lizard. You gotta track him down. He sends them off in a taxi, is looking around for the Lizard, stops off at the Daily Bugle. So Betty Brant and Ned Leeds are planning their wedding, and he's like, says, thanks, Peter. Ned and I will want you at the wedding as soon as we set the date. He says, wouldn't miss it for the world, Betty. Well, in fact, they get married. Guess what issue they finally get married?
What, like 50 issues later or something?
Much more than that. They get married in issue 156. So that made it that 112 issues from now. So that's going to take a while.
Maybe this is just one of those situations back in the day when a young couple wanted to, basically start sleeping together, but it was it was not socially acceptable to do so. They would get engaged, so that then it's like, oh well, we're going to be getting married anyway. So
yeah, exactly. So that Frederick Foswell, meanwhile, is getting more and more suspicious of Spider-Man. Peter Parker engaging in poor photojournalistic ethics, basically offering to frame Spider-Man if it'll help him sell pictures to Jameson. Frederick Foswell is kind of bothered by this. Now, unfortunately, Frederick Foswell, spoiler alert, is going to turn bad again at some point here. I guess you probably don't know that because you haven't read these comics.
I have not.
I wish he wouldn't. I like Foswell a lot. But they're sort of setting him on a collision course here by him deciding he's going to start following Peter Parker to figure out how he gets all those pictures. Meanwhile, Peter Parker goes to his college hangout, the Silver Spoon, presumably supposed to be in Greenwich Village, given that his university is based on New York University. And Harry, Flash, and Gwen are there talking about how Flash is doing his army physical. And then Mary Jane shows up. So Mary Jane has never met any of these people before. She's basically there to go on a date with Peter. The two boys are falling all over her. They're very attracted to her, Flash and Harry. And Gwen is, of course, not happy about the whole thing. So here we have the love triangle is complete. Peter Parker has his Betty and Veronica now for the first time.
And his Jughead.
Yes. So Peter can't figure out if Gwen Stacy is jealous because Flash has been paying attention to Mary Jane or because Mary Jane has been paying attention to him. Peter still can't figure out how much Gwen is into him, which it is hard to believe given how attractive Gwen is. Meanwhile, the Lizard is going around. He decides to, given that this is Tuesday, it's time to frame Spider-Man again and have the Daily Bugle fall for it, which is a little bit of a tired plot, but he basically robs, jewelry store at a high-rise. The Lizard then crawls out the side of the building. They're like, someone's done a robbery. They're crawling in the building. Clearly it must be Spider-Man. J. Jonah Jameson, of course, falls for it right away.
No, Jameson doesn't fall for it. He is woken up in the middle of the night and says, what's that? You put a late extra out while I was asleep? Spider-Man accused of stealing gems? But what if it's phony? Like all those other stories we ran. If you make me a laughingstock again. So actually, he was not the one who fell for it immediately. He is skeptical.
Right. But then he publishes a special edition saying Spider-Man accused in daring gem theft.
No, that's what he's saying. They already put that out in the dialogue. That he's pissed at them that they went ahead and put this out without his, spent extra money for a late edition and didn't consult with him, and now it might make him look like a fool. So, to Jameson's credit, he actually is skeptical this time.
Okay, good. So Mary Jane has been after Peter to repaint his motorcycle for some reason, which he does because he's whipped. And he's like, whatever you say, I'll repaint my motorcycle. I guess maybe the colorist or somebody had complained about the color of Peter's motorcycle. I don't know. But so then Peter finally tracks down the Lizard. They have a really nice, big, in-depth fight. They end up in the sewers, as Ditko would have appreciated, of course, complete with Ditko-style sewer splashes. But then Lizard ends up knocking Peter off a building, and he ends up getting a broken arm, or Is it officially broken or just sprained?
Sprained.
He's not sure.
They specifically say it's sprained, and it is a little weird. They go down into the sewers just for like literally half a page, and then they're immediately climbing back up the side of a building for this fall, which is a little bit strange. But
Yeah.
but yeah, sprained shoulder.
So then Peter gets a very sophisticated sling on his bare arm that is tied there. He stops by Kirk Connor's wife and sort of apologizes things aren't going well. He has to break a date with Mary Jane because he says now that Spider-Man has been seen wearing a sling, then Peter Parker has to completely hide from the world and can't be seen by anybody wearing a sling. Not that anybody, he's been publicly unmasked before and no one believed it. So you would think he could get away with this. But then he is really miserable and the issue ends. Says, don't despair, Spidey fan. There's more next issue. It's a bombshell. I think this is a perfectly good issue. Great Romita penciling and inking. Good storytelling. Great to get Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy in the same room at the same time finally and get our love triangle going strong. And, everything's moving fine. Everything's moving along just fine. It looks like it's going to be the beginning of a good 2-issue storyline. What did you think?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this issue. The one thing we didn't talk about, the credits, which it's not huge, but just story, Smilin' Stan Lee, illustration, Jazzy John Romita, lettering, Swingin' Sam Rosen, luggage, Honest Irving Forbush. And the joke is that the credits are written on the suitcase that Pete is carrying for Aunt May. So, generally, good issue. I like the way that they were able to bring the lizard back in a way that somewhat makes sense. The love triangle being set up is great. I think it's a nice idea getting Aunt May out for a while. I think this in some ways I wonder if this was them sort of trying out the whole idea of, can we have Peter still be the character that he is without his aunt there all the time with him sneaking around her and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Mary Jane just seems to not care at all when Pete turns down the date. And he's like, wow, she didn't seem upset. She didn't seem sad. She didn't seem angry. She's just like, yeah, sure. All right. He's like, what's wrong? So
good contrast to Betty Brant, who was, Betty Brant was a much more emotional person. And Mary Jane, at least seems, could be she's just protecting herself from being hurt. But Mary Jane, seems like a very different person than Betty Brant, a very different person than anyone Peter has been with before, which is great writing.
Yes. So, let's go ahead and do Daredevil. I will try to dispense with this as quickly as possible here, since it is not the greatest issue. So, The Mystery of the Midnight Stalker, a Stan Lee, Gene Colan contemporary classic, inked by Frank Giacoia, lettered by S. Rosen. When last we saw Daredevil, he was stranded in presumably Sicily, but somewhere in southern Europe, and needed to get home. All he had on him was his costume. He had no money, no change of identity, nothing. So some brigands who are in the local area find him and try to, I don't know what they're going to try to do since it's not like he has any money on him. But
it says he's alone and unarmed in a hostile nation somewhere in Europe. I don't think of Sicily as being a hostile nation, a nation torn by strife and revolution. That doesn't sound like Sicily. What?
Yeah, you're right. Because I think they did imply that it was Italy in the previous issue, didn't they?
Well, he was in a Roman Colosseum, but I guess there were Roman Colosseums throughout Europe because the Roman Empire was once very large.
Well, and not just Europe, but on the north end of Africa too. Maybe this is Algeria or something like that. I don't know.
But somehow there are armed revolutionary brigands roaming the hills. They don't know what to do with them. They're like, we could try searching them for money. It would be a waste of time. The costume is skin tight, except for the club in its sheath. There's nothing to search. And so then they're like, well, I guess we'll just kill him. It is a truly bizarre way to begin this issue. Ending him ditched in a Roman Colosseum was a bizarre way to end last issue, and now it gets even weirder here.
Well, and I guess if it is in Italy, there were both communist revolutionary groups and, the Gladio program or whatever they called it with the right-wing pre-created underground in case the communists ended up winning there. Maybe it's one of them. I don't know. We don't need to really spend any more intellectual effort trying to figure that out. Daredevil is able to take a plane. He's able to find a plane and fly it by himself. again, a little defensive note from Stan saying, oh, let's explain how he's able to fly a plane before I get all the angry letters. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, he's landed a spaceship before. We're fine. So Daredevil ends up in London. How he lands the plane, I don't know. It's just, oh, yeah, I was able to take this plane, and now I'm in London, and I still only have my Daredevil costume and only the money that was in the pocket of the jacket that the pilot had in this plane. Yeah, so I don't know how he would have landed without, ground control and, all that sort of stuff. But somehow he does. He gets himself to, I guess, a hotel room. He has a newspaper and is able to read that Kazar, Lord Kevin Plunder, turns savage once more. Daredevil is like, something smells fishy here. I'm going to go out and try to figure this out.
I saw on the cover that Kazar was back. I'm like, ugh, Kazar is back. That was a pretty terrible, 3-issue storyline last time Kazar was here, when Johnny Romita was the penciler and mostly writer on the book. And then I'm like, oh, are we going to have another massive storyline? Like, first of all, I'm like, how's he going to end up in London? Which it turns out the bizarre way he ends up in London. I'm like, are we going to have another massive Kazar Plunderer storyline taking us through the next several issues? Nope, it's done in one, which is the best thing that can be said about this issue.
Indeed. So, there's some decent art. There's
yes.
some good-looking art in here. But yes, so Daredevil shows up at Plunder Castle, or Castle Plunder, or whatever they call it, right as there's a crowd around and the militia has shown up. What a militia consists of in England, I'm not entirely sure. Daredevil is able to get into the castle despite the efforts of the militia and despite the efforts of Kazar himself, who does not trust Daredevil at the moment. They, of course, have another fight, as all heroes have to when they first encounter each other. And Daredevil is able to lock himself in a room in the castle at one point and make a phone call to confirm something, and we don't know what it is at first. Kazar then breaks down the door with his bare fists. I don't think Kazar is supposed to be superhuman, is he?
No.
No. So Daredevil is able to take the fight between them out the window and into the moat, at which point they find the Plunderer's submarine. Now, whether this moat connects to a larger body of water that the submarine is able to go in and out of is unclear. But
yes, most moats are not big enough for submarines. And just generally speaking, you rarely get a story set in a castle which does not involve going out the window of the castle and diving into the moat and landing safely. That's not the way moats work. They don't, hug the walls of the castle. And that's why, generally you don't want people to be able to jump out of the windows of your castle and swan dive into a moat and be just fine. And generally speaking, boats aren't big enough to have submarines in them. Or, anyway, it's always been a major pet peeve of mine.
And that's even before we mentioned the whole airlock issue here, that Daredevil is able to just open up the little airlock thing and just step right on in. It's like, how does that work? Okay, no, I know it's a comic. We're just going to go ahead and go with it. So there is a fight in the submarine, which must be pretty big, because it's got a relatively large crew in there, and they've got room to maneuver for this fight. Then the Plunderer at one point says, as he's losing the fight, as his men are being decimated, says, nothing that lives can withstand the deadly touch of my nerve bolt ray. Just one blast and I will inherit Plunder Castle and all the treasure to be found therein. Oh, and it turns out that the Plunderer was basically framing Kazar so that Kazar would be gotten rid of and he could get his castle back. But so this nerve bolt ray, it's like your whole thing is the Plunder Stone and the Vibra ray that you do from it. How do you suddenly have a whole different technology? It's not like you're a techno genius. Daredevil is able to knock the Plunderer out, and in doing so, the Plunderer falls onto a little lever that ends up bringing the submarine up to the surface. Of course, immediately the Plunderer is arrested. All suspicion on Kazar is dropped. Clearly the Plunderer is going to jail, because that's how all of this stuff always works. And in the end, Daredevil is able to use some of Kazar's money that he has generously given to get some clothes and get back home. And we just see a little bit of a cliffhanger that Karen has just gotten a letter from Spider-Man saying he knows that Matt is Daredevil, but don't worry, I won't reveal the secret. So we have no idea what's up with that, but that is going to be the next issue.
Yeah, once you raise the issue to Karen and Foggy of like, it is possible that man is Daredevil, is it true or not? It would be overwhelmingly obvious that it was true. Like, the only way Daredevil is ever going to hang on to his secret identity is if nobody ever hears the words Matt Murdock. As soon as they hear the words Matt Murdock, they're going to go like, okay, this is pretty clear. And Daredevil is going to have his secret identity revealed more often than any other hero. And then they'll just keep stuffing the toothpaste back into the tube over and over again and trying to say, no, now people don't know he's Daredevil. It's very silly with every hero, but it is never sillier with Daredevil. And the way he stuffs the toothpaste in the tube next issue is going to be through the use of Mike Murdock, which is infamously...
Is Mike Murdock next issue? Is that what's coming up?
I believe Mike Murdock comes up next issue. So this book is always been silly. It is about to reach its apotheosis of silliness with the appearance of Mike Murdock next issue.
So just a couple of other little observations along the way. Back on page 4, I've often talked about Colin's sort of almost random off-kilter panel layouts can sometimes bother me. The one on page 4, when I first saw this, I was thinking, oh, wow, the tiltedness of those panels seems to be, if somebody were falling forward, that would be a very good way of bringing that across. And I think when I first saw it, I didn't like it, but now that I'm looking at it again, I kind of do like it because it's sort of bringing forward the shift of balance that he has when he throws one of the brigands against the other brigand. When Daredevil shows up at Kazar's castle and everyone's there, Daredevil at one point says, Kazar doesn't even know how to lie. If he says he's done nothing, that's good enough for me. And it's like, how do you know that Kazar doesn't know how to lie? Like, what's going on with that?
I don't know. I can see getting that impression of the man when they hung out for a long time 10 issues ago.
All right, maybe so. At one point, Daredevil says, from here, getting inside the castle will be a lead pipe cinch.
Yes, I saw that.
Do you have any idea what that means? Lead pipe?
A lead pipe cinch. Well, sometimes you'll get a steel pipe cinch, which is not a good cinch. But then if something is a definite cinch, if you know it's going to happen, then it's a lead pipe cinch, which is, it can give you lead poisoning. It's really good. I don't know.
So that's all I have to say about this issue. We get some good Colin art,
yes.
But that's about it.
Yeah, I'd agree. Nice Colin art throughout. Nice job with the fight with the Brigands. Nice Colin Giacoya art. It's interesting that Stanley and Gene Colan are credited on the same line. It doesn't say Stanley's a writer. It says a Stanley Gene Colan contemporary classic, which you're going to see more and more with all of his books, not just the Kirby books from now on.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and jump on to Thor number 136. I would say the best book we're going to do today. I love this book. Now, occasionally, I said that one of the best writers on Marvel Comics, one of the best people to write about Marvel Comics ever is Brian Cronin, who writes about the history of comics for The Comics Should Be Good subset of CBR, comicbookresources.com. But occasionally, I disagree with Brian, and Brian will occasionally talk about how much he hates a particular issue or storyline. And he's a good writer, but sometimes he'll not write as well, and he'll write from sort of a point of view of look at how self-evidently awful this issue is. And I'll read the whole thing. I'm going I love that issue, and I completely disagree, and you are not making the case that it's awful. You are just presenting it as self-evidently awful. Well, Brian Cronin at one point wrote about this issue, Thor 136, To Become an Immortal, as if it were self-evidently awful. I love this issue, and I think this is one of the major turning points in Marvel Comics. So this issue, it says, To Become an Immortal, featuring the uncanny menace of Him Who Is Unknown, which is an awkward name. On the cover, you have Odin zapping Jane, turning her into an immortal while Thor looks worried. This does not look like a Colletta inked cover to me at all. If you look at Thor's arms, there's a definite lack of hatching on Thor's arms. I suspect this cover is not inked by Colletta.
I think you're right.
But so then,
maybe so.
Unfortunately, we get inside, and it says, a proud phantasmagoria of pageantry presented by Stanley and Jack Kirby, delineated by Vince Colletta, lettered by Artie Simek, and it does look like Colletta inking on the inside. So, Thor and Jane have just been through a massive series of storylines, and this whole time they've been putting off the big moment when they solidified their love. Odin has pretty much okayed Thor being with Jane. Now they're gonna make that work by going to Asgard and turning Jane into an immortal, which Odin has agreed to do so that they can be in love forever. Odin has supposedly agreed to turn Jane into an immortal. Well, then we get a just spectacular series. I just absolutely love this issue. We get Jane, as soon as she arrives in Asgard, she arrives on a very busy day as the entire Asgardian army is thundering past her on the Rainbow Bridge, hauling a troll that they have hogtied. And she's like, how monstrous, that unspeakable creature, is he a troll? And Thor says, do not avert thine eyes, beloved. Thou must become accustomed to such sights. For within this fabled realm, the force of evil hath many faces. And she's not only horrified by the troll, she's horrified by Heimdall. She's horrified by everything. And
well, she was horrified the very first second she was emerging from that transporting whirlwind. The second she lays eyes on the world, just the sky, she says, the colors, the brightness, the sheer beauty, it's almost unbearable. So that right from the very first instant, it's clear that she and this are not going to be a good match.
So then Thor is completely insensitive to all this. He's like, it'll be fine. It's cool. Don't worry about it. We go to Odin, who has shoulder pads that are...
Shoulder pads for days.
Shoulder pads for days.
He is as broad as he is tall. He is peacocking.
His helmet is just about as big as the shoulder pads. His helmet adds a good 4 feet to him in case he wants to put on his dating profile how tall he is. He can include the 4 feet of helmet height that he has gotten. And he greets Thor and Jane. It's like, oh, good, Thor and Jane. Jane, yep, you're going to marry my son. No problem. Up, now I'm going to make you immortal. You'll love it. You can fly. Look, you can fly. Well, Jane goes flying off into nowhere. And she's like, what am I doing? I'm soaring into the sky. And Thor has to go catch her as she is flying all around Asgard. This is a very sci-fi Asgard in this issue. And Thor has to catch her. Then meanwhile, Odin sends his assistant, his latest lackey. His lackey's always betraying him, but this one hasn't yet. Sends him to go hit a huge tuning fork to summon him who is unknown. Goes ahead and puts Jane in an especially scary room facing this four-armed creature. Thor rescues Jane, and then Thor's like, come on, Dad, that wasn't cool. What are you doing? And Odin's like, hast thou so soon forgotten? On fear doth the unknown feed. It is for that reason he hath never invaded the Golden Realm. For the gods of Asgard know not the meaning of fear. But hear me, father, she is no warrior, she is no Valkyrie born. She is but my beloved, gentle and kind and true. Is there no place for one such as she in the home of the gods? And Jane is like, no, don't ask him. I don't want it. I won't be a goddess. I won't stay in Asgard. It's too horrible, too unendurable. Don't you realize how mad it is? So then Odin says, she hath more wisdom than thee, my son. Though Asgard be heavenly now, her place is on earth below. And then he shoots her with a bolt and sends her back down to earth. Now, I think this is great. I think Jane has always been a drag on this comic. I think that's one reason why Brian Cronin disliked this issue, is that he had just read the whole Jason Aaron storyline where Jane becomes Thor, and he was like, Stan Lee was disrespecting Jane Foster in this comic and showing her as being weak and cowardly when she should have been a strong female heroine like she was in the Jason Aaron comics. I think that given the way the character had been, Stan Lee, who had, after all, created the character, given the way he had written her, I think this issue is entirely in character for Jane, and I'm very sympathetic to her in this issue. She didn't fall in love with Thor. She fell in love with Don Blake. She fell in love with this lame doctor, and then she always liked Thor too, but ultimately, she was never supposed to be with Thor, and she is not. I am very sympathetic to her. I find that, she has always been a somewhat annoying character, a somewhat negative character, not a good fit for this book. And this is the best way to write her out. This is the best way to go like, look, Odin is done standing in their way. He is going to let Jane, give Thor everything he wants by making Jane immortal, and just let Thor have it. Just go like, by the way, Thor, this is a terrible idea. I'm going to prove it right away. And Odin could not be more of an assassin in this book. okay, give you everything you want. Let's see how that works out for you. And then Thor has to rise. Now, the crazy thing about this book is then they're like, well, we can't have Thor without a love interest. So they introduce in the remaining pages, Thor does not... You would think Thor would then go home with Jane and go like, oh, I guess we can't be together after all. Let's say our goodbyes. Wish you a good, happy life. Well, no, Thor just sort of trusts that Odin will have transported Jane into a happier life, which he has done. And then Thor is like, well, I have to now go deal with him who is unknown. And then Thor does and has to be saved. This time he has to be saved from him who is unknown by a much different woman, a woman who is a big sword-wielding badass, whose name is Sif, the sister of Heimdall. And Thor is like, where have you been all my life? You are clearly a much better woman for me. You are the Asgardian warrior who my dad would be happy to have me with, and we should be together. And so then they go off together hand in hand. So we have, in just 16 pages, we have had Jane dealt with quite definitively, and now Thor is in love with someone else all of a sudden. We do get a brief bit where then Jane is in a hospital working for a different handsome doctor who looks a lot like Don Blake, and she thinks he's so handsome, I feel as if I've known him before. Or is it just that I've seen him so often in my dreams? And the whole notion of not sleeping with her boss is completely alien to Jane Foster. This is not the first time she has gone from Don Blake to another doctor boss who she intends to throw herself at. And it has happened again.
You were saying that Brian Cronin thinks that Jane is being disrespected by Stan Lee in here. I actually think that he gives her some definite agency in what happens to herself.
Oh, she totally does.
Yeah, she's just like, no, I have seen what this is. I do not want it. Please, please stop trying to make fetch happen. Let's just not. So, she makes a very active, definitive decision that this is not what she wants. And so then Odin is like, okay, well, she has spoken. We finally solved this. Here you go.
So Don Blake limps along until Simonson is doing the book in the mid-'80s. But
pun intended?
Pun not intended. But this is essentially, by getting rid of Jane here, they're essentially getting rid of Don. Like, Thor is never going to be Don Blake very often again for the rest of the 20 years that he will officially have Don Blake as an alter ego. They are essentially getting rid of Earth as a setting of this book. It will never again make sense for him to become Don Blake. It will never again make sense for him really to be a superhero. This is really the end of Thor the superhero book. It will never make sense for him to be a member of the Avengers again. He now has an Asgardian girlfriend. He is going to be someone who is largely based in Asgard and spending most of his time in Asgard and mostly fighting Asgardian villains. He is not going to be fighting communist overlords very often from now on. So this is a major turning point for this book. It's really a turning point for the Marvel Universe.
So you and I are in agreement. This is a good issue and a good way to get rid of Jane out of the book in a way that, in my opinion, does respect her autonomy and give her a happy ending.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly happy ending. She gets to, be with a handsome doctor who is not going to be someone who is always, going off to fight evil villains. I think she gets everything she ever wanted out of life. And Thor does as well. Thor gets a much better girlfriend and, less conflict with his dad, and everything's going to be better. Eventually, Jane Foster will return many times over the years there will be a bizarre storyline where she will become Sif's alter ego, where Thor will turn into Don Blake and Sif will turn into Jane Foster. And then they'll forget about that. And once again, just have him, Thor and Sif, going on Asgardian adventures, and it'll be like 100 issues before they realize, like, oh wait, she hasn't turned into Jane Foster for like 100 issues, who is supposed to be her alter ego, and then they'll finally separate them again. But this should have been, I say this should have been the last scene of Jane Foster. Of course, eventually Jane Foster will get cancer, and then eventually become Thor in a storyline that is not great, but is not terrible. Jason Aaron can write. He can write okay. I went ahead and before watching Thor: Love and Thunder, I went ahead and read that whole storyline, because it's modern Marvel, the storyline took like 4 years. And I went ahead and read all those comics. They were certainly vastly overrated, but they weren't terrible comics. And so Jane, I suppose you can't say that Jane should have never come back, because they did get eventually some good stories out of her. But this is a great seeing off of the character for the time being.
Indeed.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to the backstory of the book. We just have a quick wrap-up of the Thor versus Fafnir storyline, where Thor defeats Fafnir, rescues Volstagg, and then Odin is like, okay, now that you have finally killed off the final person from this entire realm, I will go ahead and make it nice and green again. I'll have a bunch of rainfall and a bunch of grass will grow, and I will we have completed our genocide of this world, and now I will allow it to live again. Which is, oh, isn't that nice of you? And that you would deign to do that.
Yeah, ooh, thanks. So generous.
And that is the end of that storyline. So everything is very much wrapped up here in Thor. It's very rare we get a definitive end to Tales of Asgard, and we have a definitive end to the whole era of Jane Foster, and really the era of Don Blake as well. So I think this is a great issue. I think it's just fantastic. By the way, I like Claudia's inks. Claudia's inks continue to get better and better. The last panel on page 9, where Jane is trapped in the underground chamber with him who is unknown, or whatever his name is just great. Beautifully colored, beautifully inked, beautifully everything. I think that there is, Claudia has bought a brush and he is using it liberally. I think this is a really nicely inked issue.
Another panel where I think that Coletta did a really good job with this is on page 12, panel 3, where you have the giant, angry, almost abstracted face of Odin just letting Thor have it.
Yes.
And that is a really well inked as well as penciled panel. Of course, it's followed immediately by one of the worst inked panels in the entire issue, the very next panel on page 12, which just is scritchy, scratchy awfulness. But yeah. Maybe Coletta got it all out on that panel.
Yeah. Okay.
So shall we move on to Tales to Astonish, number 87?
Let's do it.
Okay, so at last, the secret of the Hulk revealed for all the world to see. The cover is actually drawn by Gil Kane. I thought it looked Gil Kane-ish, and now I went and looked it up, and indeed it is.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely Gil Kane. That looks like,
well, yeah.
This is, because, Gil Kane often doesn't ink himself, but Gil Kane inking Gil Kane is, which he is clearly doing here, is the most Gil Kane-ish thing in the world. And I saw this cover, I'm like, whoa, because of course, Gil Kane will eventually become a big penciler of interior pages for Marvel, but Marvel will always prefer him on covers to insides, and he will do many more Marvel covers than he will do insides. And indeed, he does not do any insides to this book, but here he is front and center on the cover.
Yeah, and as when Kirby leaves, Kane basically replaces him as their go-to cover guy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little ad down in the bottom right-hand corner of the cover. They're on TV, Marvel Superheroes. So, little in-house ad. Okay, so Submariner, The Moment of Truth, story Stan the Man Lee, illustration Wild Bill Everett, lettering adorable Artie Simak. I noticed they're not doing the co-credits on this. I wonder if there's any sort of reason for that involving, maybe Bill Everett being like, look, this isn't the Submariner I would have written, so I don't want to be credited with it, or if Stan is like, I don't know. Who knows?
Well, it does say, special note of nostalgia, Wild Bill Everett, who illustrates our tale this month, doesn't give him writing credit, was the artist who first illustrated the Submariner more than 2 decades ago, and wrote it, don't give him credit there, when he originally burst into stardom. Enough said. Bill Everett has been on and off this book as inker over the last year, but this is, I think, the first time he's doing pencils and inking, and so they're pointing out that he was, in fact, the creator of Submariner.
Where is that?
You don't have that?
Oh, where?
It's on the splash page.
No. What I see here, it says, we had planned to present a breathtaking, hard-hitting, unforgettable...
I have that, but I have... Here, I'll send you what I got. Do you not have this special note of nostalgia on the left-hand side of the page?
No, I have nothing there. And as a matter of fact, now that you say that, it looks like there was some production department redrawing of something in that area.
I will text you this.
It looks almost sort of like Coletta-ish inking in that lower left-hand corner.
I just texted it to you.
Oh, yeah, no, that's definitely not there. And that explains the weird re-inking that I've got over here. Because, yeah, it looks terrible. And I was actually noticing that. I was like, wow, that does not look like, Everett's usual standards over there. That is strange. No, not there at all.
Okay. Paste up fell off before they scanned the books into Marvel Unlimited. If we haven't mentioned this recently, I am reading scans of the original issues, and Steve is reading the versions you can currently find on Marvel Unlimited. And so often there are bizarre changes. Often things will make sense in the original, but not make sense in the version that's on Marvel Unlimited. And we always assume that this is because they did a paste up with actual, it used to be if you did a paste up, you used actual paste, and paste dries up over the years, and eventually paste ups flake off the page. So if they did it originally one way, realized it was a mistake, fixed it before the original issue was published, and then later that paste up they did dried up and blew away, that then you have bizarre cases where it is more often the case that something will be correct in the original comic and wrong in the current version than it is the other way around. They've spent less time going back and fixing these things than they have breaking them.
So if you're reading this on Marvel Unlimited and you get to that splash page and you look at the lower left-hand corner and you're like, wow, Bill Everett was not paying attention when he did that. Well, no, he wasn't, because he clearly did not do that. Okay, that is interesting. So we pick up where we left off, which is Submariner in New York. Krang and Dorma had just been captured by the Earth forces right as their potion that turned them into typical melanin-challenged people who could breathe air back into Atlanteans that are blue and cannot breathe air, so they are starting to suffocate. Namor is able to grab them and bring them back into the water. Krang, of course, immediately repays him by punching him in the face. Dorma then swims back to Atlantis. Now, I had not gotten the impression that Atlantis was necessarily incredibly close to New York City.
There was a time before when I think Johnny dumped Namor in the water and was standing on the dock going, where did he go? And then Namor swims to Atlantis, sees it's been destroyed, and swims back while Johnny was still standing on the dock. So that sort of implied it's about, a couple of feet off the shore of New York. So
Well, so yes, that was Fantastic Four #4. That was, a very famous thing. But Namor is super powered in comparison to both humans and Atlanteans. So it just seems that just sort of a normal Atlantean who we've always talked about, can Atlanteans actually swim or not? And that's not clear, that she would be able to swim right to the throne room or whatever. I don't know. Somehow it strains my credulity, but that's just me. She is able to get his vizier, Vashti, to operate some sort of teleportation ray that teleported Namor and Dorma and Krang back to Atlantis. Namor, instead of just imposing summary judgment on Krang, instead says, you know what? I want to prove to my people that I am really the rightful ruler here and that you will not be able to lay claim to any of this anymore. So I am going to fight you in single combat. Krang says, well, but you're superpowered. Like, how is that going to work? He's like, okay, I will use no weapons, no armor, no nothing. You can get whatever you want. And Krang's like, oh, in that case, yes, I'm going to go get a suit of magnesium chainmail armor. Because magnesium is something that we've talked about in the past that has some special properties about something. Or no, we didn't. Yeah, no. I don't know why they bring up magnesium.
I'm thinking of the old Matt Groening Life in Hell, where it talks about the different types of professors you meet in college. And one is the one crazy theory explains the world professor. And he's saying the country that controls magnesium will control the world.
Yes, exactly. I'm just thinking of the scene in Jurassic Park where, it's like, his suit of magnesium. Ooh, magnesium, everybody! It's magnesium! See, nobody cares. So anyway, he's then also got some kind of electric knuckle gloves that he's going to use. And so the two of them have their single combat in front of everybody. Of course, Namor defeats him handily and then banishes him Actually, does he banish him or does he put him... No, he puts him in prison, basically. Yeah, he basically throws him in solitary confinement indefinitely.
Yeah, which is good, because he's tried banishing him in the past, and that didn't work out well. So I'm glad he's got something different he's doing this time.
And then at the end, Namor and Dorma end up getting, I think I've heard the term pre-engaged before.
Yes.
That seems to be more or less what's happening here. He's like, yeah, you do not bow to me anymore. You will sit by my side. One day you will become the princess that rules by my side.
I don't want to marry you. I just want you to know that we're engaged to be engaged. We're gonna, one of these days I'm going to ask you to marry me, I promise. In the meantime, live by my side.
Right, and once again, this might be similar to that whole Betty and Ned theory that I came up with earlier. It's going to be legit eventually. Oh, yeah, so there's a weird thing. So the editor's notes that have long been a signature of Marvel Comics. There is an editor's note in this issue that is credited as being from Roy.
Yeah.
Roy
is not credited as editor.
No, and would he be editing Stan anyway? It's just weird. It doesn't seem to really make any sense based on what we've seen before or what we're looking at right now. But yeah, that's on page 2, I believe. Somehow the page isn't actually numbered here. Yeah, on page 2, panel 4.
Okay, on mine, it's not credited to Roy. It's credited to Stan.
What on earth?
On mine, it says at the bottom, remember Tidal Wave Time, last ish?
Yeah.
Sure you do, -- solicitous Stan.
This is solicitous Roy. What? Okay, even the paste up thing makes no sense in that case. Why would Roy even be mentioned? Okay, I am baffled. I am utterly baffled.
This is why it's good to have us read these, read different versions. But I just sent you, Steve, a text of the page in the original comic, which said, remember Tidal Wave Time last day? Sure you do. Solicitous Stan.
Yeah, that's just baffling. Yeah, and sometimes I've thought, maybe I should go back to reading the scanned versions. But then sometimes like, no, I've committed to being this part of the duo at this point.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go on and do Incredible Hulk. The Humanoid and the Hero. Story, Smile and Stan Lee. Art, Big John Buscema. Inks, Mighty Mickey D. Lettering, Adorable RDS. Mickey D. Mickey DeMeo, who is actually Mike Esposito.
This is presumably before McDonald's was called Mickey D's. But
yeah, probably
this is shocking to have John Buscema still in this book. This Hulk is so associated with John's brother Sal Buscema, who is not at Marvel yet at this point. I had completely forgotten that John Buscema at this point has done 3 issues in a row of Hulk. I had completely forgotten John Buscema had a run on Hulk, and he's getting better and better. This splash page is gorgeous. This is, seemingly the Hulk and the Humanoid have destroyed the entire city. They're standing in a pile of rubble with seemingly a burning city behind them, and this is just too, obviously Buscema would eventually become most associated with Conan of anybody. And of course, Conan is famous for his thews. You can see that Buscema is already a fan of the thews here. He has already got a lot of musculature here on the Hulk and the Humanoid as they're grappling with each other.
All right, I don't know if I'm mishearing you or whether this is something I'm not familiar with. Thews?
Thew.
Okay. I was hearing Fuse, but still, that's not a term that I've used that much. Okay.
Thews. Thew. Pronounced Thew. Muscular strength, brains and brawn, thought and thew, muscles and tendons, perceived as generating physical strength. She touched his magnificent thews. Yes.
Okay, well, I have learned a new piece of vocabulary that I'm not sure I knew before. Hulk is still in the middle of one-on-one combat with the Hulk killer Humanoid, who is left over from the presumed dead leader, but he had left this thing behind. The army still thinks that the Hulk was involved in getting the Orion missile shot at New York City, and they think that the city was saved in spite of the Hulk. They are about to learn differently.
Well, I say, I've already talked about how great page 1 is, but now let me talk about how great page 2 is. This is Buscema really understanding the gift that Ditko has given him here and Ditko got a lot of great art out of the Hulk fighting these rubbery humanoids and the Hulk just being driven absolutely crazy, trying to land a fist on one of these things and them just absorbing his blows in a rubbery way. And Buscema just does a gorgeous job on page 2 of the poor Hulk landing 5 blows in a row on the humanoid and the humanoid reacting in a rubbery way to each one. And it's just really gorgeous.
Yeah. So the fight continues. Meanwhile, the intelligence that was just gathered by the person interrogating this shady character in Florida is gathered that the Hulk was not in league with this guy and was not trying to hurt New York, but actually is the one who upended this guy's plans and saved New York. So he's like, oh, I got to get this information back to General Ross immediately because we don't want to kill the Hulk and then have it turn out that he was actually the good guy. So they're able to get this information back. The army is trying to figure out what to do now because they're still destroying New York as the fight goes on, and they need to take care of the Hulk killer humanoid and now try to do it without hurting the Hulk. Meanwhile, we finally get Boomerang back.
Ugh.
Or we unfortunately get Boomerang back.
Boomerang's whole motivation was that he had been hired by the Secret Empire. That was the entire reason Boomerang was fighting anybody, is because he was being paid by the Secret Empire to do it. Well, the Secret Empire no longer exists. Boomerang has zero motivation to do anything at this point. No one is paying him. He was a work-for-hire person. Marvel, if you think anybody would understand the concept of work-for-hire, you would think it would be Marvel Comics. And you would think they would know that if someone is no longer paying you, you stop working for hire. Why? What is the Boomerang doing here? Why can't we be done with this guy?
Well, maybe Marvel is trying to give an example that it's like, well, maybe you can keep on working even when you're not being paid.
Exactly.
So, but he's bragging about his upgraded costume and weaponry, even though I had to go back and look at previous issues to see what was different about this costume. It looks very similar to me, but I guess he had more of his little discs on his blouse arms there, and there were some other slight differences, but it's still very, very similar. But yes, you're right. He has absolutely no motivation to be doing anything else yet, other than just, a chip on his shoulder, I guess.
But even then, he finds the Hulk fighting the humanoid to presumably insert himself into this fight for no reason.
Yes.
And then he finds them and then flies up to them and then flies away, I guess. Or, we don't see what he does once he flies up to them. We get the Hulk and the humanoid conclude their whole fight over the course of several pages, and then we see that the Boomerang is just lurking. He's just lurking and watching this whole fight conclude. So why on earth 5 pages earlier did he fly up to them in the middle of their fight if he intended to then just withdraw and lurk?
Yeah, he's just saying, if I hurry, maybe I can still reach the scene in time to gloat over the Hulk's annihilation. And then he sees the two plummet out of the sky, and he's like, oh, well, I guess the Hulk's dead. I guess the Hulk's been defeated. I would have defeated the Hulk even worse, so he's lucky. I'm like, sure, Boomerang, whatevs. Yeah, but you're right, that is just really weird. What is he doing there at this point? The inking in this issue is sort of uneven. Page 7, panels 1 and 2 are not particularly good. But the Hulk still, has a little bit of banner is hanging around in there somewhere, and he has an idea about this, what is it, a Navy yard in New York City, presumably the Brooklyn Navy Yard, that they're going to have some equipment there that he's going to be able to use to do something to take care of the humanoid. He conveniently turns back to Bruce Banner because he sees Rick Jones get hit by the humanoid. Of course, they haven't yet 100% gotten the whole idea that the angrier he gets, the more Hulk he gets. They've talked about that before, but apparently they can still, when the plot demands it, do the other thing. So he turns back to Bruce Banner long enough to go ahead and cobble together whatever kind of weapon he was going to make, and then it has to be lifted up over the humanoid in order to work, so he's able to then get himself to turn back into the Hulk, so he can pick the thing up and defeat the humanoid. And at that point, they both look like they are knocked out, and we're not sure. The Hulk is alive, but barely. So, and then, as you said, we just see the Boomerang just sort of lurking and gloating. Okay. And once again, You have been complaining about Hulk-Inude. They're still doing it.
Every issue ends up with the Hulk-Inude. So
once again, I know I've already referenced this joke once in this episode, but stop trying to make Hulk-Inude happen. Hulk-Inude is not going to happen.
So this whole issue is bizarre. This whole issue is based on like, oh, turns out the Hulk was actually not just trying to destroy New York. That means he's been cleared. That means we shouldn't try to stop him or kill him. And it's like, I'm sorry, was the Hulk ever convicted of anything? Like, he's like you've always had it out for the Hulk for no good reason. Now that you found out this latest reason is not a reason to go after him, then he's just free and clear. He's just free to go. Like I would think that none of this would have changed their feelings to the Hulk in any way. But I generally like this issue, except for Boomerang. I love to see the Hulk fighting humanoids. That's like my favorite thing in this entire book. We have great art of the Hulk fighting this rubbery humanoid. And it's really nice to have him figure out a way to defeat him by going back and forth between Banner and Hulk, and really sort of Banner and Hulk are tag teaming the humanoid in order to defeat him, which I really like quite a bit. I like the way this plot works out. I like everything about this issue except for Boomerang. Great John Buscema art.
Fantastic. Well, let's move on to X-Men, and then I will need to go here, and we can record the next episode in a few days.
Okay, let's go ahead and finish up with the X-Men number 28, The Wail of the Banshee. Just wait till you meet the Ogre. Well, wait a second. Which is it? Is it the Banshee or the Ogre? Well, it turns out they're both going to be introduced in this issue as two villains who team up, and the two villains team up with the name Factor 3. Like, okay, if you have a two-villain team up, don't call yourselves Factor 3. That implies there will be a third villain, which there is not yet in this issue.
I thought Factor 3 was their boss.
Yeah. Well, it's very unclear. It seems like the two of them are referring to themselves as Factor 3, which makes no sense because there's two of them. Eventually, we'll find out Factor 3 is a whole thing that we will find out more about in future issues. That
seemed clear to me, but that's fine.
We begin this issue with a big green flying thing going around and screaming. So I will go ahead and tell you, I have never liked the Banshee. I didn't like him when he was a bad guy. I didn't like him when he was a good guy. He will be both a bad guy and a good guy in the early X-Men issues, and then eventually he will return to join the new X-Men when the new X-Men arrive, and he will, on both Dave Cockrum and John Byrne's issues of the new X-Men, he will become a major part of the new X-Men until finally one day he screams himself out and burns out his voice and is never a major X-Men character again after about issue 120 or so. But we're about to get lots of Banshee off and on for the next 100 issues. And hoo boy, I'm not happy about that. I never liked the idea of, this is not the first character in Marvel or DC who can fly by screaming. This makes no sense to me. I don't understand how screaming can help you fly. Even weirder, he can talk while he's screaming.
That's what bugs me.
Sometimes he'll be flying through the air, using his scream to fly through the air, and he'll be like, oh, hey, how you doing? Don't mind me. I'm just here flying through the air screaming. And it's like, well, then shouldn't you be plummeting to your death right now? Because suddenly you're talking when you were using your scream to keep you aloft. Now, I should say the really interesting thing about this issue, the only really interesting thing about this issue, is that the Banshee has a really interesting face in this issue. You don't really get to see it very much in these first couple of pages, but you get to see it more when he's no longer using his screaming on page 5. And I don't know, is this face supposed to look Irish? Why does he have such a big...
I think he's supposed to look... I think he's supposed to look like an Irish ape. I think he's supposed to be the old racist caricature of an Irishman, the classic Irish ape.
Okay. All right. So this is... so.
Is this not something you're familiar with?
Irish ape, we're both of Irish heritage. I'm not familiar with the Irish ape.
No? Oh, yeah, no. Google Irish ape or look it up on Wikipedia. No, it was a thing that was used to other Irish people to say, oh, yes, well, I know that you look at them and you think that they're just a white person, but no, they're actually closer to apes than they are, even though they look like this, really, I mean...
Okay, so, I was going to say that it's sort of a shame that, generally speaking, most comic book characters all have the same face. It is very rare that you have a comic book artist who will actually give characters distinctive faces, certainly, especially once they're good guys. And I was saying it's sort of a shame that the Banshee used to have a distinctive face, and then certainly by the time John Byrne is drawing the character in the late 70s, early 80s. He has just a generically handsome face. But I guess there's a good reason to no longer give the Banshee this face if this was supposed to be a racist caricature. But so then the Banshee is an interesting character.
I mean, that's my reading of it. Especially in some of the later panels where he just looks pretty inhuman in the way that his face is laid out. Particularly the final page. That just really looks to me like that, and it might very well not have even been a conscious thing on Werner Roth's part. It could just be like, oh, I want to make this guy look Irish. Let me look. Oh, this is how you do Irish people in cartoons. Sort of the way that someone might have done an Asian person and just been like, oh, well, I don't hate Asian people. I know some Asian people. When you draw an Asian person, here's the buck teeth and the thick glasses and the, whatever else. Like with Will Eisner and Ebony and, various stuff like that. And some of that may have been malicious. Some of it may have just been, I'm a cartoonist. This is the way that we cartoon these people. I don't know. But that very much to me, especially on the final page, looks like that.
Okay. Well, yes, he has an interesting, unique face here that he will not have in later appearances. So we begin with the Banshee is stealing a piece of art from an art gallery just because he is an aesthete and likes nice art. Then he goes back to the ogre, who's like, what are you doing? We're supposed to be bad guys. You're going around stealing art.
He's specifically stealing Gaelic art. Okay, yes. Gaelic, that makes sense. He's Irish. But then Stan has this footnote that says Gaelic, referring to the Scottish Highlands. Scholarly Stan. It's like, well, yes, Gaelic could refer to the Scottish Highlands, but that would make no sense in this particular case. It would make more sense if it was the Irish countryside, but okay.
Which can also be described as Gaelic. Yes.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Very strange. So then, meanwhile, the X-Men are trying to... can we make a third joke? Stop trying to make the mimic happen. The X-Men are trying to train the Mimic to join the X-Men. Of course, he has a problem in that he can't fly too far away from the Angel or else he loses his wings. They are trying to have him join the team for no good reason. The Banshee is pretty lame, but he's not as lame as the Ogre, this guy with no powers who is wearing a purple spandex suit for no reason. And then they go ahead and they team up. I'm just going to skip to the end here. They team up versus the X-Men. Eventually, the X-Men figure out what's going on with the Banshee, and they all put in earplugs. I once wrote a screenplay about someone who had mind control powers using his voice, and I realized, okay, eventually, once this guy's had several confrontations with the heroes, then the heroes are going to all just start wearing earplugs all the time and just learn to communicate using ASL because they're like, well, we're fighting someone who has power in his voice. And I realized my whole job as a writer is to keep that from happening, keep this story from getting to the point where the heroes are just wearing earplugs all the time. But they do not do that in this comic. It does get to the point where the heroes are all wearing earplugs all the time. And then they all get in a big fight. Eventually, the Ogre gets away, and Banshee, turns out, was being used against his will to fight the X-Men. I guess the Ogre doesn't get away. Does he? I guess the Ogre eventually gets captured, but the Banshee reveals he's been wearing a headband this whole time, says, but through this headband, the Ogre actually dominated me, and if I hadn't done my part, he would have killed me by remote control. So he's
nicely done.
Now a good guy. So then, but meanwhile, we have an infamous no prize book panel where they are trying to prepare their headquarters for the attack by the Banshee. And it's unclear what Hank is doing. Hank is hanging from the ceiling, I guess installing some sort of soundproof padding or something. And Jean is levitating a tool to him. And as she is levitating it, she says, here are your pliers, Hank. Pliers, pliers. Here are your pliers, Hank. And she is actually levitating a flathead screwdriver to him. And Hank accepts the flathead screwdriver, despite the fact that he seemingly asked for pliers. And Hank is not only not correcting her, he says, you're a credit to your gender, Jeannie. So even if she had correctly given him the tool he asked for, then it would be insulting for him to say you're a credit to your gender, Jeannie. But given that she has given him the wrong tool, it's hard to tell if he is mocking her unbeknownst to her or if he does not know either the difference between, it could be this happens with married couples all the time where you're like, hand me those pliers. And then your wife hands you a flathead screwdriver and you're like, oh, right, that's what I meant, flathead screwdriver. And your wife's like, I know, honey, I knew what you meant. So this could be one of those type situations.
Yes. Let's go with that. Let's go with the more generous interpretation there.
Yes. Anyway, that's it. I'll check my notes, but I think that's all I had to say about this issue. What did you have to say about this issue?
As I said, I might be over reading into the caricatured face on Banshee here, but I don't know that I am. I still think it's more likely than not that whether or not it was meant maliciously, that this was still hearkening back to racist stereotypes of Irish people. Overall, Werner Roth's art is, as I've said before, aggressively adequate. And it continues to be.
And I've said before that that's too kind. I would call him aggressively inadequate, but okay. It's I hate the art on this issue. I think it's just terrible, especially the ogre. The ogre is so terrible.
I don't know. I mean, the ogre, his costume design makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, the whole character makes no sense whatsoever. But I don't have a problem with how he's drawn.
I can't stand him.
Okay, so, but meanwhile, there's, towards the end of the issue, Banshee is trapped inside a vacuum chamber that the X-Men have, apparently. But he's in basically a spacesuit inside a vacuum chamber inside the mansion. I'm guessing this came from the Danger Room. I'm guessing this is just another way that, Xavier was going to murder his students, but instead they ended up using it here. Also, one of the things, though, it looks like he's floating like he's in outer space, which I don't think that's what a vacuum does, but, it's... I mean, yes, space is in a vacuum, and it's not like there's regular gravity there, but it's a whole different thing. Yeah, so the ogre has this repello ray, which he's using against the X-Men, and then he's saying out loud, apparently, because Banshee actually reads his lips, and he says, it just takes a simple adjustment to turn this device into a deadly weapon. And it's like, so this wasn't a weapon before? Like, what? Why do you have this big gun-like thing that you are using, and then now I'm going to turn it into a weapon? Yeah, it makes not much sense. I had a few more notes here, but I think both you and I have to go. So this issue is not really worth picking apart much more. So yes. We will go ahead and call it there, and we will get together in a few days to record the next episode.
I will just add quickly, Rob Salkowitz had said, you had the Mimic, the Super Adaptoid, and the Super Skrull, and he's like, do these characters ever meet? And it does say next issue, the Mimic will meet the Super Adaptoid. So Rob Salkowitz will get his wish. I'd forgotten they ever met. But okay, I will go ahead and take care of my poor son, who is homesick from the very first day of school. And but thank you for discussing these issues with me. Good luck seeing your daughter off to college, and we will do the second half of the month when you get back.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, everybody out there in podcast land. I look forward to talking to you again in a few days. Take care and stay safe out there.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to MarvelRereadClub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.